Next up, a closer look at one of the many weapons in the ongoing battle against the state's opioid and addiction crisis, sober houses. They're becoming increasingly popular, and for many, they offer a lot of hope. But as Christina Quinn tells us, they're also facing big challenges.
At the Bennington House, a sober home in Quincy, the house rules are prominently placed on the refrigerator. Attending several AA or NA meetings a week, doing chores, taking drug tests, and meeting curfew are mandatory. While residents didn't want to be interviewed, the managers were anxious to talk about how this kind of setting is essential to transitioning back into society and staying sober.
You can't go from a solid program to just back out on your own, because it turns into a chaos for you. Then everything's in your face. You have to slowly, gradually get into it and be prepared.
And you see, if I'm living with someone who I see struggle through situations during the day, there's also that support system.
Sober houses are often conflated with halfway houses, but the main distinction is that sober houses do not provide treatment, as they're often the last step for someone coming out of rehab. Another distinction, anyone can open a sober house.
If they're going to do it, they got to do it right. Don't do it because of the money.
Sober homes are not state regulated because they don't provide medical treatment, but many saw the need to set some standards. So operators created the nonprofit Massachusetts Alliance for Sober Housing, and MASH is now the state's authority on certifying sober homes. To date, they have certified 157, with 40 more on the waiting list.
People are really wanting to do the right thing. They are wanting to, come together as an entity and organization, share best practices to provide the most quality sober homes that we possibly can.
The Bennington House is MASH certified, which is a voluntary process, but there's good reason to do so. Under Massachusetts law, any treatment or correctional facility that receives state funding can only refer people to MASH certified homes. Still, some argue that's not good enough. Back in Quincy, City Councilor Brian Palmucci has proposed an ordinance that would regulate how a sober house is established.
What is most concerning to residents is that they go to sleep one night, they wake up the next morning, and there's a sober home that's opened up next to them in a predominantly residential neighborhood with no warning, no communication, no discussion about who's going to be there, how many people, what their backgrounds are, and also, more importantly, who the operators are.
One thing the measure calls for is notifying the city 30 days in advance of opening a sober house.
You'll have an opportunity then to meet with city officials and have a plan presented as to how you plan to operate your sober home, what the qualifications are of the folks running the sober home.
Despite mandatory drug testing and curfews, there have been overdose deaths at sober houses in Massachusetts over the years. Josh Silvasheen agrees there are a lot of sober house operators that don't do the right thing and need to be held accountable.
Do it because you mean it. And if you're doing it about the money, then get the proper management in there to run it properly if you don't want to run it properly, because it's not safe. And we're talking about lives. There's a reason why that we don't have ODs and deaths, because we do it correctly.
Christina Quinn joins me now. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Jim.
How many sober homes are there in Massachusetts, certified and uncertified?
Certified, 157. Uncertified, it remains unclear. A few hundred. There could be way more than we know because we just don't know. Anyone can open them.
Who owns these homes? And he was talking about don't do it for the money. You just said a minute ago. How much should we rent? What are we talking about?
Yeah, well, some of the operators, so a lot of the operators and owners, the vast majority of them, I'm told, are recovering addicts themselves, recovering alcoholics, and they just want to pay it forward. But there are some who are in it to make the money, and you can make, upwards of hundreds of dollars per week per person.
The certification is voluntary. I understand that's one of the major themes in your piece. So does that mean there's nothing else that can be done to ensure that there are minimum standards? Is it sort of you're on your own if you don't voluntarily choose to get certified?
Right. So, it is a voluntary process because you can't regulate these homes because there's no treatment in these homes. And also adding to that, under the Federal American with Disabilities Act and Fair Housing, people with addiction problems, they are classified as people with disabilities. And so if there are any efforts at the local or municipal level to regulate anything, those federal laws protect them from.
We only have a couple of seconds. I'm assuming we're not aberrational. This is happening all over the country?
This is all over the nation. And I spoke with the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, and they helped MASH, get everything in order. The good news is that a lot of these homes, a lot of these affiliations are opening up in many, many states across the country. That's the good thing. There are more houses becoming certified and opening up. But there's still the stigma associated with sober housing, and that continues to be an ongoing struggle.
Christina, thanks for bringing it to our attention. Really appreciate your time.